Okay, well today I'm joined again by Tieran Kimber from Marchese Partners, and we're going to be discussing the integration of residential aged care facilities and medical centres, something that has been occurring more and more in recent times and was a pretty significantly asked question off the back of our aged care webinar a number of months ago. So Tieran, thank you very much for joining us once again.
Thank you, Marcello.
And Tieran, we'll get straight into it. We'll keep this pretty short and sharp, but the first question that's probably the best way to start is, why would firstly a residential aged care facility consider integrating a medical centre as part of its kind of build and operation?
I think it's a really important question, and with the future of aged care in all sorts of clouds, people wondering what's going to happen with funding from governments, market response to products. I think the whole idea of silo operations and standalone operations needs to be questioned a bit further. So we're working with some operators who are looking in a lot of detail at that, and they're looking at the idea of medical centres being integrated as much as a business proposition as building a community asset that strengthens the care products they're already providing. So while this kind of thing isn't new, rural health facilities around Australia have had integrated care opportunities, and groups like TLC have already constructed small medical centres within their aged care facilities. I think this is an idea that really sets the scene for developing a far more clever health and wellness package that's built around the aged care area. So I guess there's opportunities for to enhance the lives of residents and enhance the businesses of providers.
So just touching on that, enhancing the lives of residents, there's obviously a few specific benefits that we'll go into, but first and foremost, in terms of your work, what have you seen as the main benefits for the residents in these facilities when having a medical centre integrated?
Well, I think traditionally aged care has been a position of last choice. You don't want to go into an aged care facility. So to provide extra opportunities to give people safety, security and comfort that their real health and care needs are being addressed is important. So setting up co-located medical facilities starts to create a story that's really strong and helps reinforce the business of an aged care provider. So the security of healthcare, there's the perception of minimalising personal health risk, which obviously this year with all of the COVID epidemics, we've seen a significant amount of stress on the health system. And if we're able to provide a cleverer position on how that comes together, I think that's really important. And I think understanding how these facilities sit in the community is really important. So providing a medical facility of some sort actually brings the community onto the site, so residents can feel less isolated, and we're creating a bit of a hub where there's both people coming onto the site and residents able to go to some place that feels like they're going off the site and moving into new social opportunities. So there's a whole range of reasons why you should be looking at how medical facilities can sit on a site that benefits residents and probably gives a lot of comfort to the families and friends of those people in those facilities, that there's they're not relying purely on the facility itself, even though that's maybe how it's run, but there's the opportunity to provide extra support services around that.
And you touched on TLC earlier, probably a good example of leading into the next question, but from a provider's perspective and their reputation, what are the benefits there? Obviously, we've seen TLC have had a lot of good press this year as a result of that integration. I think I've seen they're one of the first to integrate heat sensors or cameras as people walked into the facilities as well as part of that medical offering, and they were able to have essentially no issues this year with COVID as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think firstly it creates a point of difference, and it shows that there's a real customer focus and a focus on the individual as important. So that's something that the provider's able to leverage in terms of the products and care offerings they're providing. but also it's telling the community that this is more than just a place where you go and look after someone till they die, that this is actually a positive part of the community that's setting up a way of helping people live to the best of their abilities and help them to be well to the end of their life as best as they can be. So the provider reputation, it shows them that they've got a commitment not just to the individuals but to the broader community that they're caring for.
And probably for operators, the million-dollar question is, this integration, is there a benefit, or what is the benefit to the bottom line for these providers if they do this successfully?
Yeah, well, I think that's the key thing. Really, you shouldn't be doing any of this if you don't have a strong business case around it. I think there's a number of ways to look at it, though. That you can start with a smaller operation that's just seen as a local GP augmenting this, or you can move to something a bit larger. For example, like the work Marquesia are doing with Lindoc Living, where we're building a complete health and medical precinct. So in terms of the bottom line, I think it's important that it is a commercial position, and it should be bringing in an alternative income stream. And given the pressure on funding and the potential future issues around funding, providing those extra income streams is certainly important. And in some ways, this is an easy win, and that there are a lot of medical providers who would love to have partnerships. I think if we look at it from a design point of view, retail theories of having anchor tenants and building a package of solutions around that, you can apply the same to the aged care buildings as an anchor tenant and start to build a health and wellness hub around that, where you build up a core business that might be much bigger than the sum of its parts. So there's opportunities just well beyond just standard GP practices through to allied health and all of the other associated things that hang off GP clinics, x-rays, urgent care, pathology, things like that all can add to something much bigger and much more important in securing the future of how we care for all the generations in our society.
And it certainly makes all the sense in the world. I mean, from the work that we do, and from a medical leasing front to larger scale providers, a lot of them do want to be within proximity to either a hospital or an aged care facility. So kind of a super clinic would make a lot of sense. And you could certainly picture it kind of thriving in an aged care setting where you do have a kind of true hub as well.
Mm, yeah.
Now, moving on to the next question, Kieran, there's obviously a number of elements involved in the process of integrating a medical centre with a residential aged care facility. Can you touch on some of those in particular? And you did mention, which I think we'll touch on a bit later as well, the Lindoc Living project that you're working on, which we may use as a case study as we kind of progress as well.
Sure. Well, I guess in some ways the aged care facility shouldn't be the determining factor itself, but I think issues like there are a lot of practices in suburban houses around the city. These are prime opportunities to start discussions with, to create a business focus on building new opportunities for these groups that would hopefully be an attractive option. And while the one we're working on is certainly a substantial project, it's probably about 4,000 square metres of lettable space with a 20 practitioner practice involved. They obviously don't have to be as large as that, and a lot of practices might be smaller at 4 to 8 practitioners. And I guess really it comes down to how much land you've got and the broader vision that you've got about how you're building this integrated community facility. So I guess the disadvantage in the urban areas is that there are more significant car parking requirements for a medical centre. So that really needs to be taken into consideration when you're integrating this with co-located aged care facilities.
And in terms of integration and design elements, Kieran, from your perspective, obviously having done a fair bit of work in that space, is there an ideal size? Is there a general rule of thumb that you use when integrating or designing these medical centres with a residential aged care facility, or is it based on a demographic? How is that size determined?
Well, I think really that's a business question more than an architectural question. So we work with various groups who look at investigating the business proposition, and again, groups like CBRE even understanding where the market's sitting and who the players are and how they might work together is really important. So it's going to depend on your site opportunity firstly, and then what the local businesses around are. So I think it's an evolving storyline, but once a few of these facilities are up and running, I think they'll start to tell a much stronger story to the broader market about how you can look at this. And I think, there are maybe beyond medical, understanding things like allied health, gyms, daycare centres, all sorts of smaller community add-ons can be considered as a part of this. And I think the opportunity is there, but it obviously needs a bit of business planning and research up front before you start putting some lines on the paper.
And just following on from that previous question, again, this is relatively broad, but are there some kind of general examples or examples you've seen of how these facilities are best integrated with a residential aged care home?
Well, I think I can only refer to the one I'm working at within the medical centre. So if we use that as a position,
yep.
There's a key storyline there about how you respond to the needs of your local community. And there's a great need for quality healthcare in the larger regional centres. And by using a trusted local brand like a not-for-profit community aged care facility is a really strong way of building a good narrative for health and wellness in the community. So I guess in that, actually I've forgotten what you asked. Bloody hell.
That's all right. We'll keep the recording going because I'll just chop and change it. You've essentially answered the last question. Like, we're basically just going to go straight into the case study.
Yeah.
Lyndoch Living. So I'll pause for a second. I'll just say, let's keep going from that.
Yep.
Of Lyndoch Living, then we'll just go into that as the final point.
All right.
Perfect.
Talk about it directly. Yeah.
And just following on, Kieran, from that previous question, you mentioned Lyndoch Living and you were kind of running over some of the elements, but as a case study to finish off, what can you take from that project and what works well and the design elements and the business perspective in relation to the broader topic of integrating a medical centre with an aged care facility?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the philosophy of a business itself. So I think aged care entities need to be actively looking at how they are innovating and creating new positions in the market. So in the case of Lyndoch, they looked very strongly at their local community, at what the gaps were and what local businesses were looking for to help reinforce each other's strength in that local market. So one of the areas they focused on was health and medical areas, and they found that there are a number of medical practices that were very excited about joining with them and partnering to create something that was a part of a bigger brand. And now we're working through the process of bringing those practices onto the site. And what that actually does is it isn't just about the medical practice and the GP clinics themselves, but it's everything else that they bring onto the site. So this is a facility they're looking at with 20 practitioners. There'll be a combination of mental health, urgent care, x-rays, pathology, a dentist, potentially some other counselling and consulting suites. And all of these things combined create a much larger entity that's a very strong business tool for an aged care operator to have that income stream coming in, and it also gives their own residents on the site where they have 200 odd beds, a peace of mind about what they're doing. So beyond that, as they've engaged with the market research, they've discovered that there are things like function centres that are required, and the local medical practitioners have functions that they need, so they're actually providing a space where normal commercial functions can happen. So presentations and peer groups and industry groups can rent out spaces for functions. So once you start unlocking the key in some of these areas, the business opportunities can be limitless. So as they slowly explore how this happens, they're finding that there's a real strength in the size of the investment they're making. So there's also some retail opportunities there. So they've got a pharmacy and a cafe that are also reinforcing that, and it creates a core number of customers that are always on the site, engaging with the facility. So there's a lot of excitement about where that's all heading.
And what we'll have on the screen is a few examples that Tieran will include from the Lindock Living Project. It's obviously a topic, Tieran, I'm sure you could talk about for a fair amount of time. We will conclude it there. I'm sure plenty of people will have some specific questions relevant to them for you post this. So on the next slide, we'll have Tieran's details there along with the team. So if you have any questions of Tieran or want to discuss the kind of topic further, you're more than welcome to reach out to Tieran directly. But Tieran, thanks once again for making the time to sit with us and talk through one of the more topical items in the aged care space at the moment.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Marcello, and thank you, CBRE.